In the deepest pit of America's prison system, buried behind layers of concrete, steel, and silence, one man controlled an army. He didn't need a phone. He didn't need freedom. He didn't even need sunlight. He ruled Los Angeles from a cage, and the world outside trembled at his whisper. This is American Gang War TV, and tonight, you meet the puppet master who turned a prison cell into a throne. Frank "Puppet" Martinez entered federal custody with a reputation soaked in fear. But few understood the scale of his ambition. To the guards escorting him into the system, he was just another violent recruit. To the 18th Street Gang and the Mexican Mafia, he was a rising force. To Martinez himself, prison wasn't the end. It was the beginning. He arrived with a calmness that unsettled even the most hardened inmates. No fear, no hesitation, no second-guessing. He walked into his cell as if stepping into an office, a place where work would continue, strategies would evolve, and his reach would only grow stronger. Inside those walls, Martinez found exactly what he needed: isolation, structure, control. The streets were chaotic, but prison? Prison was predictable. Predictability is power. And Frank Martinez recognized that immediately. Long before the public ever heard his name, Martinez was already shaping the future of the Columbia Lil Psychos, a deadly subset of the 18th Street Gang responsible for extortion, narcotic sales, murder for hire operations, and community domination. But Martinez's genius wasn't violence, it was organization. He understood hierarchy, he understood psychology, he understood fear, and he understood that an army doesn't need to see its general. It only needs to obey him. By the late 1990s, Martinez had transformed the CLCS into a profitable, structured criminal network. Extortion routes were mapped like legal business districts. Drug corners were assigned like corporate departments. Every soldier, every lieutenant, every collector answered upward. And at the top of that pyramid was a man who never touched the street. Prison didn't cut Martinez off from power. It centralized it. Inside, he couldn't be touched. Inside, his decisions couldn't be questioned. Inside, his authority became absolute. From solitary confinement, he issued orders with the precision of a military commander. MacArthur Park became one of his strongest financial engines. Drug trafficking, vendor taxation, protection rackets, all revenue flowed back toward Martinez. Every dollar collected by CLCS foot soldiers was counted as rent. Rent paid not for property, but for permission to exist. Street vendors lived in fear of weekly payments. Some gave half their entire income. Others were forced to borrow money just to pay their tax. Anyone who stepped out of line was reminded that Martinez's reach extended everywhere. Prison fences didn't stop him. They amplified him. Every empire requires communication. And for Martinez, communication came through the person he trusted most, his wife, Janie Garcia. She wasn't a gangster. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a killer. She was worse. She was loyal. Janie memorized instructions to keep Martinez safe from intercepted notes. She carried messages between CLCS captains, oversaw payments, and delivered warnings with the same seriousness as her husband. She moved quietly, strategically, and without hesitation. The ultimate courier for a man who couldn't speak openly. Through Janie, Martinez built an invisible bridge from his cell to Los Angeles. Orders flowed like water. Discipline remained intact. Money traveled through hidden hands and safe routes. To the outside world, Janie was a wife visiting her husband. To the criminal world, she was the voice of a king. If Janie was the bridge, the attorney was the shield. Attorney-client privilege became Martinez's most powerful weapon. Behind closed doors, guarded legally from prying ears, messages moved effortlessly. Transfers of money, coded instructions, tactical directives, all disguised as legal consultations. The attorney laundered well over $1 million in criminal income. He visited Martinez more than 60 times. He operated as a fake legal counsel and a true criminal conduit. With the protection of the Constitution itself, Martinez built an impenetrable empire. He wasn't just avoiding detection. He was using the system to expand. This level of corruption didn't just strengthen Martinez's reach, it blinded law enforcement for years. Martinez spoke a language few understood. Every order was disguised. Nothing was said directly. Collect rent meant extort. Clean the neighborhood meant eliminate competition. He's sick, or he needs medicine, meant someone needed to be removed permanently. This coded vocabulary, threaded through prison visits, phone calls, and messages carried by Janie. Even if law enforcement intercepted communication, they couldn't decipher the structure behind the words. Every phrase was layered with meaning. Every sentence carried authority. Every message was a weapon. Martinez never touched a gun. He didn't need to. He created a world where violence moved at his command, without fingerprints, without evidence, without hesitation. But one event would shatter the illusion of invincibility. One moment would expose the empire he believed was unbreakable. And it began with the smallest, most innocent life imaginable. For years, the Columbia Lil Psychos ruled MacArthur Park with an iron fist. Most people complied, most paid, most obeyed. But every empire eventually meets someone willing to resist. It began with a street vendor, a man who sold fruit, candies, and small toys. He had no power, no gang ties, no protection. He was simply tired of paying the CLCS tax. $50 a week was the difference between feeding his family and starving them. That week, he refused. One no was all it took to shake the entire criminal structure. Because defiance spreads, and Martinez could never allow defiance to grow. His soldiers hit the streets with strict instructions. The vendor was to be punished publicly, not just to enforce discipline, but to send a message that no one, no matter how poor or powerless, could deny the puppet master his rent. But in the world of organized crime, even controlled violence spirals. And this time, it spiraled into tragedy. The hitman tasked with enforcing Martinez's order was a young member of CLCS. His name was Giovanni Mito. He was eager, loyal, dangerous, and completely unprepared for the pressure of a public execution. He approached the vendor in broad daylight, under the sun of an ordinary Los Angeles afternoon. The park was busy. Families were walking, street musicians were playing, children were crying, laughing, living. The perfect stage for a show of power. The perfect place for a single, devastating mistake. Mito drew a weapon. People screamed. Chaos erupted. And then, a bullet fired. Not at the vendor, not at a rival, but at a stroller. Inside that stroller was a baby, 23 days old. A child who had barely opened his eyes to the world. A child whose life ended before it began. His name was Luis Angel Garcia. In that single moment, the city froze. Los Angeles has known its share of gang violence, but the death of a newborn ignited a fury rarely seen before. The public demanded answers. The mayor demanded action. The police demanded arrest. And Martinez, from the solitude of his prison cell, demanded revenge. Frank Martinez didn't issue emotional commands. He didn't rage. He didn't panic. He didn't mourn. He calculated. A murdered baby was the kind of heat that could burn CLCS to the ground. The Mexican Mafia, the EM, expected discipline. They expected structure. They expected the situation to be corrected. Mito wasn't just a liability. He was a threat to the entire chain of command. From his cell, Martinez issued the order using a cold fragment of code. Mito is sick. Give him medicine. The message moved through Janie, then through lieutenants, then through soldiers, then across the border. The assignment was simple. Find Mito, remove him, erase the problem. In a world built on fear, loyalty is rarely permanent. But obedience is absolute. Mito didn't know he was being hunted. He didn't know his loyalty had become irrelevant. He didn't know that the man he served had just signed his death certificate. Mito trusted his fellow gang members. He trusted their promises. He trusted their invitation to Mexico. He shouldn't have. Lured across the border under the pretext of laying low, Mito was taken to an isolated site, a barren cliff edge overlooking nothing but rocks, wind, and death. There was no ceremony, no final words, no second chances. He was beaten, dragged, and thrown over the edge. The fall didn't kill him, but it shattered him. Bones, lungs, hope. He lay broken, barely conscious, surrounded by dirt and stone. Most men would have died there, but Mito crawled, inch by inch, through agony, through betrayal, through the silence of a night that should have been his last. He crawled until he found a road. He crawled until someone stopped. He crawled his way out of his grave. And when he survived, he did the one thing Frank Martinez never expected. He talked. Federal agents had been trying to crack Martinez's coded world for years. Wiretaps yielded nothing. Intercepted letters revealed nothing. Street arrests produced silence. But Mito, broken, betrayed, and abandoned, had nothing left to lose. He described the structure of the CLCS. He described the coded phrases. He described the hierarchy. He described the role of Janie Garcia. He described the secretive attorney-client channel. He described the murders, the extortion routes, the orders from prison. He had knowledge no one else dared share. He had details no one else could supply. He had survived the execution Martinez demanded, and now he was ready to burn the empire down. But he wasn't the only one. Another soldier in Martinez's world was about to face death and choose the same path. And together, their testimonies would destroy everything Frank Martinez built. The streets of Los Angeles always had rules, unspoken laws, enforced not by police, but by fear. Extortion, taxes, discipline, boundaries, all maintained by the gangs and the shadowy prison generals behind them. But every system, no matter how vicious or well-constructed, has pressure points, weak angles, human flaws. All it takes is one moment, one error, to send everything spiraling beyond control. For Frank Martinez, the man running a violent criminal empire from a concrete box, that moment arrived quietly. It didn't come through a coded message. It didn't arrive through one of his lieutenants. It didn't even come from a rival. It came from something far more unpredictable. Stupidity and panic on the street. And it started with a street vendor who refused to pay taxes. The vendor was not a gangster, not a rival, not a player in the game. He was simply a father, operating a small business along a stretch of South Los Angeles that 18th Street considered its property. The tax they demanded was small, but symbolic. Paying meant obedience. Refusing meant defiance. And defiance could not go unanswered. Martinez, viewing the world through the detached lens of a federal inmate, believed his orders would be followed with clean precision. He believed the people carrying out his will were capable. He believed fear ensured competence. But he was wrong. On the outside, one of his younger soldiers mishandled the job. Instead of issuing a warning, something simple and controlled, the soldier panicked, and his panic created a ripple effect that would soon crush the entire organization. The young gang member aimed for the vendor, but his shot missed, and the stray bullet struck a baby. The city froze. News stations looped the footage. Community activists erupted. Politicians seized the story. The public demanded consequences. And for the first time, law enforcement saw an opportunity. A crack in the armor of 18th Street and the Mexican Mafia's grip. A moment where even the prison generals could no longer hide behind coded messages and plausible deniability. Inside the prison system, word traveled fast. Even the reinforced silence of Martinez's Supermax confinement couldn't shield him from the outrage echoing through the yards. When a civilian was harmed accidentally, the organization called it a hot murder, the kind of heat that draws task forces and federal indictments. And this wasn't just any civilian. This was a baby, an innocent child caught in the crossfire of petty extortion. The gang world considered it sloppy, reckless, embarrassing. And embarrassment inside a criminal hierarchy is dangerous. It challenges authority. It questions leadership. It shakes confidence in the chain of command. For Martinez, the repercussions were immediate and severe. Suddenly, the Mexican Mafia, an organization that tolerated no mistakes, demanded accountability. They wanted order restored. They wanted silence maintained. And most importantly, they wanted the problem erased before law enforcement could exploit it. To them, the problem wasn't the baby's death. The problem was the shooter, the one who missed, the one who brought unnecessary attention, the one who jeopardized revenue streams and operational security. That shooter was Giovanni, better known on the street as Mito. In a world governed by fear, individuals like Mito were considered disposable. But before they could dispose of him, investigators beat them to the punch. Detectives quickly identified Mito as the shooter through witness statements and surveillance. As the city erupted with grief and anger, police intensified their search. Mito, sensing the inevitable, fled to Mexico. But running didn't save him. It only exposed him. Back inside the prison walls, Frank Martinez faced the consequences of a kingdom cracking beneath him. Commanding from a cell had worked for years, but now the ground shifted under his feet. Ordering discipline was no longer a tactical decision. It was a strategic obligation. The Mexican Mafia pressured him to clean up the mess, to eliminate the shooter and reassert control. The problem was that Mito was beyond his reach. For years, Martinez controlled the streets without ever touching them. But now, his network needed to stretch beyond state lines. His influence had to cross borders, and that demand widened the investigation. Suddenly, the FBI, ATF, LAPD, and federal prosecutors saw a pattern. One that connected prison orders to street executions. One that linked coded calls to real bodies. One that revealed how a man in solitary confinement was orchestrating violence hundreds of miles away. The tragedy of the baby shifted public sentiment. Community groups that once saw gangs as untouchable now demanded their dismantling. Law enforcement agencies that rarely cooperated now shared intelligence. For the first time in years, the full weight of government resources pointed toward one target: the hidden hierarchy controlling 18th Street. And yet, while the city mourned and investigators mobilized, the world inside Martinez's cell grew darker. His network began to fray. Lieutenants on the outside acted without discipline. Informants started whispering. Rivals within the organization sensed weakness. To them, power was not inherited, it was taken. And when the man at the top appears vulnerable, those beneath him consider the throne within reach. As public outrage grew, authorities finally closed in on Meadow. Mexican officials arrested him, holding him on local charges. But the danger didn't end there. Meadow didn't just face prison time. He faced execution from the very organization he served. He knew that if he was extradited or returned to Los Angeles, the Mexican Mafia would silence him instantly. His only chance at survival was the one word that violated every code he ever lived by: cooperation. While he sat in custody, weighing whether to flip, investigators examined every thread of the shooting. They followed bank transfers. They tapped phones. They intercepted letters. And soon they realized the truth. This wasn't an isolated act of violence. This was the symptom of a command structure that reached inside the nation's most secure prisons. And standing at the top of that structure was Frank Martinez. But this story wasn't done unraveling. While Meadow weighed his options, another figure stepped into the spotlight. Termite, another enforcer tied to Martinez, became a target as well. A second mistake, a second wave of heat, another unraveling thread in the criminal web. And like Meadow, Termite soon realized he was expendable. 2 men, 2 survivors, 2 potential informants, and their testimonies would become the catalyst that brought down an empire. For Martinez, the empire he built was now on the edge of collapse. The organization he commanded with precision was unraveling. The baby's death, an accident in the chaos of gang politics, marked the beginning of the end. The city was watching. The FBI was mobilizing. The Mexican Mafia was demanding blood. And Frank Martinez, locked inside a concrete tomb, realized that for the first time, the world outside his cell was moving faster than he could control. The empire was slipping. And the fall had only just begun. The death of the baby had set off a chain reaction that nobody could stop. Not the police, not the community, not even the gang leaders operating from the shadows. But the people who felt the pressure most intensely were those closest to the crime. Those who carried out the orders, those who enforced Martinez's demands, and those who acted as the middlemen between prison commands and street violence. Among them stood 2 men whom the organization once trusted. 2 enforcers shaped by gang life, molded by violence, and conditioned to obey without question. But once the consequences landed on their shoulders, everything changed. Their loyalty fractured, their certainty dissolved. And soon, both men would become central players in the collapse of Frank Martinez's empire. The first was Mito, the shooter whose mistake triggered the storm. While held in Mexico, he watched the machinery of justice and revenge closing in on him. The second was Termite, a veteran street operative entangled in Martinez's broader network of discipline and enforcement. Each man faced pressure from both sides: law enforcement seeking answers, and the Mexican Mafia demanding silence. Both forces were unstoppable, and both offered only one outcome: death. Inside the prison system, Martinez received mounting pressure from the Mexican Mafia's leadership. They expected order. They expected consequences. They expected the system to function as it always had: cleanly, efficiently, and without the irritation of law enforcement attention. For decades, the organization maintained its power by avoiding unnecessary heat. They tolerated brutality but despised incompetence. And Mito's mistake crossed the line. For them, the only acceptable answer was removal. But Mito was out of reach, sitting behind walls controlled by foreign authorities. Martinez's influence was vast, but it was not limitless. His commands could cross state lines, corrupt attorneys, and manipulate coded messages. But to send an assassin into Mexico required precision, money, and unwavering loyalty from his lieutenants. That combination was fragile. Still, the order went out. Mito needed to be silenced before he could speak, before the authorities could question him, before he could connect the dots between street-level actions and prison-level commands. But every link in the chain was under surveillance. Every handler, every messenger, every associate was already flagged by federal agents. And so the attempt to reach Mito in Mexico fell apart before it began. The assassin never arrived. The plan collapsed under the weight of mounting pressure. While investigators monitored the unraveling command structure, they discovered something far more damning. The attempted hit on Mito wasn't the only cleanup operation underway. Termite, another figure tied to Martinez's network, found himself marked as well. He possessed knowledge that law enforcement had not yet uncovered. He knew the structure of the extortion system. He knew how the money flowed. He knew who took orders directly from Martinez. The organization moved to silence him. But once again, the plan failed. The hit was sloppy. The details were rushed. The enforcer sent to eliminate Termite lost his nerve, leaving the job unfinished. And that hesitation created another fracture in Martinez's crumbling empire. Termite survived the attempt, and when investigators finally made contact, he realized that cooperation was no longer betrayal. It was the only path out. 2 mistakes, 2 failed executions, 2 survivors with everything to lose and nothing to gain by remaining silent. Federal investigators saw their moment. They approached both men separately. Their tone was cold, calculated, and precise. They offered no promises, only realities. They laid out the consequences in detail. The gang would kill them. The organization would not protect them. Their only chance was to speak. And the truth these men carried threatened to expose every layer of Martinez's hidden power. Mito broke first. Fear began to outweigh loyalty. The reality of his situation became too heavy to ignore. He had been abandoned by the people he once served, left alone in a foreign prison with a target on his back. Turning himself in became a form of survival. And once in American custody, the first cracks in the wall appeared. Under federal protection, Mito revealed the communication channels. He described how orders flowed from solitary confinement into the streets. He detailed the chain of command. He broke down the coded language, how seemingly innocent phrases translated into kidnappings, extortion, and murder attempts. Investigators absorbed every word. Termite followed. His experience was different, closer to the streets, grounded in the day-to-day operations of the crew. He explained the money structure. He described the tax collections, the laundering methods, the channels used to funnel money back into the prison. He identified the people who enforced Martinez's commands, the contacts who delivered coded messages, the soldiers who collected debts and delivered threats. Together, Mito and Termite painted a picture of an empire built on fear, precision, and secrecy. But they also revealed its weaknesses. They showed where the communication lines blurred, where the chain of command became unreliable, where Martinez's grip was already slipping long before the baby's death. Their testimonies gave investigators something they never had before: a comprehensive map, a blueprint of how a high-security inmate operated a criminal syndicate with the efficiency of a corporate executive. Armed with this new intelligence, federal agencies expanded their surveillance. Phone taps intensified. Information flowed freely between departments. The FBI, LAPD, Homeland Security, and ATF formed a coordinated strike team dedicated to dismantling Martinez's network, piece by piece. The pressure on Martinez grew unbearable. The walls of his concrete cell felt smaller, tighter, colder. For years, he had controlled the streets without leaving his cage. But now, every message he attempted to send risked interception. Every coded word risked exposure. Every lieutenant he trusted became a potential informant, and every mistake widened the cracks in his empire. The Mexican Mafia, sensing instability, applied their own pressure. They scrutinized Martinez's decisions. They questioned his leadership. They demanded explanations he could no longer provide. And in a world where respect is currency, Martinez found himself in debt. With each new arrest, each new indictment, each new informant, the system he once commanded began to implode. The combination of law enforcement pressure and internal suspicion formed a deadly vice around him. The whispers grew louder. The confidence in his leadership faded, and the unstoppable momentum of federal investigation pushed the empire toward a breaking point. Martinez could feel the end approaching. Power, once absolute, was slipping from his grasp. The network he built with precision was collapsing around him, and for the first time in years, he understood the truth. A single mistake, one bullet fired in panic, was all it took to bring down a king. The storm that swept through the organization did not announce itself with noise or chaos. It arrived quietly, in sealed warrants, coded case files, and discreet morning meetings inside federal offices. It moved with the slow, deliberate certainty of a machine designed for one purpose: to crush a criminal empire from the inside out. With the testimonies of Mito and Termite, investigators finally had what they needed to escalate operations. What began as a homicide investigation now evolved into a full-scale RICO focus, aimed at dismantling every layer of Martinez's reach. The task force expanded. Agents from multiple departments joined forces. Analysts began cross-referencing every piece of data from the last decade. The deeper they went, the clearer the picture became. The criminal network surrounding Frank Martinez was not chaotic or improvised. It was engineered. It was structured. It was built with the precision of a command center. And now that the structure was exposed, the strategy became simple: isolate, divide, and neutralize. Surveillance intensified. Every known associate of the CLCS was monitored. Every financial transaction, every meeting, every visit to the prison was tracked. Hyper-focused intelligence units followed tax collectors, street-level enforcers, money couriers, and lieutenants. They mapped the organization's internal hierarchy with near-military precision. The agents knew it would take time. They knew it would require patience and discipline. But they also knew the walls were closing in on Martinez, and so they allowed the network to operate just enough to reveal its remaining branches. Inside the federal Supermax, Martinez sensed the shift. The tension in the air sharpened. Guards were more attentive. Attorney-client visits became more tightly monitored. Requests he once sent routinely now met bureaucratic delays. The environment had changed, and he could no longer read the patterns. The silence around him grew heavier, signaling movement he couldn't see. But the biggest change came from within his ranks. Fear had infiltrated his organization. The arrests made people nervous. Uncertainty spread faster than any rumor. Soldiers once loyal to the cause, now worried about the consequences. Families questioned the future. And with the arrest of key lieutenants, replacements were less experienced, less disciplined, and more prone to mistakes. Every new misstep created more evidence. Every shift in leadership generated more surveillance opportunities. And federal investigators studied every movement with meticulous attention. Behind closed doors, prosecutors built a case unlike anything the CLCS had faced before. They pieced together wiretaps, text messages, coded letters, financial trails, and testimonies from former gang members. They connected isolated incidents into a single narrative of organized crime driven by a man locked in a cell thousands of miles from the streets. The irony was striking. The kingpin who once controlled entire neighborhoods now found himself powerless against a system designed to uncover every secret he relied on to maintain control. As the investigation neared completion, federal agents prepared for the decisive blow. It would be broad, swift, and overwhelming. They planned a coordinated takedown that would strike simultaneously at every major node in the organization. This operation would not target a single individual or a small group. Instead, it would aim to destroy the entire criminal infrastructure: leaders, enforcers, tax collectors, couriers, and facilitators. The goal was total collapse. On the morning of the operation, agents gathered across multiple districts. Teams assembled with precision, each group assigned specific targets. Vehicles lined federal parking lots. Tactical units suited up. Briefings were delivered in calm, steady tones. There was no room for error. They knew the people they were about to confront. They understood the risks. And yet, the coordination was impeccable. When the operation began, it unfolded with military efficiency. Dozens of doors burst open across Los Angeles. Streets echoed with the presence of law enforcement. Helicopters hovered overhead. Agents moved into position, securing locations one by one. Within hours, the landscape of the CLCS changed forever. Dozens of members were arrested. Homes were searched. Vehicles were seized. Documents were collected. Hard drives, Cell phones and ledgers were taken into evidence. Entire sections of the gang's infrastructure were dismantled before noon. The operation was not simply a show of force. It was a demonstration of a decade's worth of investigative work coming to fruition. Inside the Supermax, Martinez learned the truth later that day. His network had been torn apart. People he trusted were in custody. Entire revenue streams were frozen. The silence he once controlled had shifted into a silence he could no longer command. Within weeks, indictments were handed down. 43 members of the Colombia Lil Psychos were formally charged under federal racketeering statutes. The charges covered a wide array of crimes: extortion, murder conspiracy, drug trafficking, money laundering, intimidation, and obstruction of justice. For Martinez, the indictment was especially devastating. He was already serving extreme sentences under maximum security conditions. But the new charges added layers of legal weight that guaranteed he would die inside the system he once manipulated. Prosecutors presented mountains of evidence, not fragments or isolated incidents, mountains. Entire transcripts of coded conversations were deciphered and analyzed. Financial trails connected street-level extortion to prison-level authority. Every dollar collected traced back to the orders Martinez sent through his network of messengers. The testimonies of Mito and Termite solidified the case. Their statements aligned with the digital evidence. Their timelines matched the records. Their descriptions mirrored the structure investigators had uncovered independently. The defense had no foundation strong enough to counter the level of detail brought forward. One by one, the defendants faced sentencing. Some received decades, others received life. Those lower in the hierarchy accepted deals to reduce their sentences. But the leaders, the enforcers, the coordinators, the decision-makers, received punishments that effectively ended their criminal careers. Among the sentences, the case of attorney Isaac Glenn stood out. His role had been particularly damaging. He had not acted under coercion or desperation. He had used his professional status and legal privileges to move money, deliver messages, and facilitate Martinez's orders. His betrayal of the legal system was severe, and the sentencing reflected that breach. When the courtroom read his penalty, it sent a message across the city. The institutions that protect society may bend at times, but they are not unbreakable. When corruption surfaces, consequences follow. As the dust settled, the Colombia Lil Psychos found themselves without leadership, without resources, and without the structure that once provided power. The impact rippled across the neighborhoods they once controlled. The tax collectors were gone. The enforcers were removed. The hierarchy had collapsed. But the story did not end with destruction. Power vacuums do not remain empty. New groups emerged. Former members reorganized. The gang adapted, as criminal organizations often do. The takedown weakened the structure, but did not erase the culture that created it. The long-term transformation would demand more than arrests. It would require social change, community investment, and systems designed to disrupt recruitment pipelines. Still, the collapse of Martinez's empire was a landmark victory. It disrupted a chain of violence that had harmed countless families. It demonstrated that even leaders operating from the darkest corners of solitary confinement were not beyond reach. And it proved that coordinated law enforcement, combined with strategic intelligence, could dismantle networks built on fear and secrecy. For Martinez, the final outcome was absolute. His influence diminished, his communication restricted, his ability to command vanished. The empire he constructed through codes and silence now existed only in memories and case files. Power, once absolute, had turned into confinement without purpose, and the king who ruled from a cell was left with nothing but time. The collapse of the Colombia Lil Psychos was not a single moment. It was not a headline or a courtroom verdict. It was a slow, grinding unraveling that stretched across months and years, touching every corner of the neighborhoods they once dominated. The organization that had controlled entire blocks, entire economies, and entire generations found itself reduced to fragments, pieces of a once powerful machine now scattered across the landscape of Los Angeles. But while the CLCS crumbled, the world outside did not pause. Communities still carried the scars of extortion, violence, and fear. Families still remembered the losses. Vendors still remembered the taxes they were forced to pay. And law enforcement continued to operate under the shadow of a question that had no easy answer. How does a gang continue to thrive even after its leadership has been destroyed? To understand the aftermath, one must return to the foundation of Martinez's power. The empire he built did not rely solely on individuals. It relied on economics, on culture, on the social realities of neighborhoods shaped by poverty, instability, and limited opportunity. Even after the arrests, those conditions remained. With Martinez locked away behind reinforced steel and concrete, serving life without possibility of release, the world outside moved on. But the impact of the empire he constructed continued to echo through Los Angeles. In some parts of the city, the takedown created breathing room. For the first time in years, vendors operated without paying weekly taxes. Parents walked their children to school without watching the rooftops or alleyways for armed lookouts. Streets that once felt monitored by invisible eyes now felt almost normal, touched by an unfamiliar sense of calm. But in other areas, the absence of leadership created internal tension. Factions splintered. Younger members, without guidance or hierarchy, fought for control of remaining territory. These battles were smaller, less organized, and lacked the old precision, but they were unpredictable, and unpredictability created new challenges. Law enforcement recognized this shift. Their work was far from done. Removing the leadership was only the first step. Preventing the rebirth of a similar structure required ongoing intervention. Task forces remained active. Community programs expanded. Schools increased outreach and support to at-risk youth. The city began investing in violence prevention efforts designed to interrupt recruitment pipelines before they formed. Still, the power vacuum created a complex environment. Some older CLCS members attempted to regroup, forming new alliances or shifting into different criminal markets. Others, fearful of repeating the downfall they witnessed, left gang life entirely, choosing instead to rebuild the lives they had once abandoned. For federal investigators, the collapse of the CLCS became a case study, a blueprint of how deeply organized crime could embed itself in a community and how difficult it was to completely eradicate. They knew that arresting leaders addressed the symptoms, not the sources. But they also understood that their efforts prevented further deaths. further extortion, and further tragedies like the one that ignited the investigation in the first place. The memory of that tragedy, the 23-day-old infant whose life was cut short, remained at the center of every report, every briefing, every evaluation of the case. It was a reminder that behind every statistic, behind every file number, behind every gang name, there were human lives shaped and shattered by violence. Inside the Supermax facility, Frank "Puppet" Martinez lived in the silence he once controlled. His world had been reduced to concrete, steel, and routine. The coded messages, the hidden power, the constant influence, those days were gone. The empire he built from behind glass and razor wire had dissolved into federal archives and court transcripts. He became a relic of a different era, a symbol of how much power a single inmate could wield when the system's vulnerabilities aligned with his ambition. But in the present, he was simply another prisoner, serving a sentence with no end. For Martinez, the world outside existed only through distant memories. His wife, once his messenger and closest confidant, drifted out of the narrative, exhausted by years of legal exhaustion and emotional weight. His associates disappeared into federal facilities scattered across the country. His empire had no successor capable of reclaiming its former glory. And in the neighborhoods he once influenced, life continued. Not perfectly, not peacefully, but resiliently. Families rebuilt. New businesses opened. Children who once feared street corners grew up in a different environment, unaware of the hidden war that shaped the blocks they played on. The city remained imperfect, but moving forward, shaped by cycles of violence and recovery that had repeated across generations. Yet, even as the CLCS declined, the broader networks of the 18th Street Gang and the Mexican Mafia endured. These organizations were larger, older, and more deeply rooted than any single faction. The removal of Martinez and his crew weakened the structure, but it did not dismantle the larger ecosystem. Los Angeles, like many major cities, faced a complex reality. Organized crime was adaptable. Leadership changed. Methods evolved. Technologies shifted. But the core forces that created these organizations, poverty, instability, lack of opportunity, remained battlegrounds without simple solutions. Still, the Martinez case offered lessons that reshaped law enforcement strategies. It highlighted the dangers of unmonitored attorney-client privileges. It exposed the flaws in prison communication oversight. It revealed how easily coded messages could bypass detection and travel across vast networks. And it demonstrated the importance of unified task forces that operate with precision and cooperation. The federal government adopted new monitoring protocols. Prison systems updated their communication filters. Legal visitation policies were revised. Training programs emphasized the early identification of coded language and unusual patterns in inmate behavior. These changes did not eliminate crime, but they closed pathways that had once allowed leaders like Martinez to operate freely. 2 years after the last sentencing in the CLCS case, a federal review concluded that the operation prevented dozens of predicted extortion cycles and reduced targeted violence across multiple districts. Community surveys reflected noticeable improvements in safety perception. And while criminal activity still occurred, its nature had shifted away from the centralized extortion model that once dominated the area. Across Los Angeles, the memory of the case remained part of the city's true crime history. Documentaries were produced. Court files became publicly accessible. Crime analysts dissected a timeline in academic journals, studying the rise and fall of a Supermax commander who controlled a street army from a cage. In the quiet corners of the neighborhoods, stories about the era were told in hushed tones by those who lived through it. Some spoke of the fear. Others spoke of the resilience. And many expressed relief that the shadow of the CLCS no longer defined their daily lives. For the families affected by the gang's violence, justice came slowly, imperfectly, and incompletely. But it came. And for the investigators who dedicated years to dismantling the empire, the case became a career-defining achievement, a testament to patience, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to truth. As time moved on, the criminal landscape continued to evolve. New threats emerged. Technology opened new doors. But the fall of Frank Martinez remained a reminder of a fundamental truth. Even the strongest criminal empires can crumble when their foundations are built on fear, secrecy, and silence. And even the most powerful leaders can be brought down by a single moment, a single mistake, or a single life taken too soon. In the end, the story of Martinez was not only a story of power and control, it was a story of consequences. A story of how a man who believed he could rule from isolation discovered that influence is fragile. Loyalty is conditional, and the weight of violence eventually collapses on those who wield it. It was the story of a king who ruled from a cage and lost everything.